Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original crew, man? We're back. Hey, man, we're back with another baller. We'll be all cut up today. But he gonna drop another one tomorrow. So we gonna be back. Y'all, hey, we just gonna have to give y'all the baller when we can. He been pushing them. Mm-hmm. Hey, and I respect the grind, my brother. I respect the grind, man. Hey, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go. If you want to first support, all you gotta do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
like it with a thumbs up.
This one, we got his premonition was only half right. How you say that? Say it.
You said it right.
But also, hey, if you're new to the channel, haven't already, hit the subscribe button, man. Join the family, join the fun. What we don't see?
We on the road. We on the road to 300K.
Where you
and
at?
we're trying to get there by sometime in the summer.
Where you
Beginning, middle, end. I get y'all to the end of the summer.
I'm trying to get y'all to the beginning.
Okay, mid-summer.
We still winter.
I'm trying to be
still winter time. We got the spring.
Okay, sometime in the summertime. Sometime, get us there.
But also, man, shout out to those comment of the day, man. We highly appreciate you, man. Where were you?
Around.
I don't know. Yeah, around your head, huh? Let's go. Let's check it out. Let's see what's about. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get it.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button is struggling to fall asleep because they're scared, offer to tell them a comforting bedtime story to help them sleep. But tell them Bell's Canyon. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of Tuesday, July 13th, 1993, a middle-aged nurse named Sharon Dempsey hurried down the hallway of the Meharry Hubbard Hospital, which was in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. And as she went down the hallway, Sharon checked in every single hospital room because she was searching for a patient that kept disappearing from her room. When Sharon reached the end of the hallway, she looked into the last room, and there, inside, was the woman she was looking for. Her name was Mildred Lancaster. She was 69 years old, and she was sweeping the floor of another patient's room with a broom that Sharon knew she had taken from the custodian's cart. Sharon walked in, and she politely asked Mildred, what are you doing here? And Mildred turned to her and just said, oh, she was just doing her job. But she wasn't really doing her job. Mildred had been admitted to the hospital 2 days earlier because she was having stomach pain. But she was also suffering from extreme bouts of confusion. At this, Sharon, the nurse, just sort of sighed and kind of rolled her eyes because, obviously this was not Mildred's job. Mildred was a patient. She had been admitted to the hospital 2 days earlier, primarily because she was having stomach pain, but she also suffered from severe bouts of confusion, which is something she was witnessing right here. Her family had told doctors that, Mildred had spent most of her life being a housekeeper. And so when she would get confused, which, they saw plenty of times, she often would sort of default to thinking that she was back to being a housekeeper, even though, she was home or clearly not working. She would think she was working. And so when Mildred began demonstrating this kind of bizarre, disoriented behavior, there was some consideration to actually just physically restraining Mildred inside of her room to keep her from vanishing and, going and thinking she was a housekeeper somewhere. She could get into trouble or get hurt. However, Mildred was this very sweet and gentle woman who, it was just hard to forcibly restrain inside of her room. And so instead, the medical team decided that we're just going to have to deal with the fact that periodically she's going to, think she's at work and it might walk out of her room and go start cleaning somewhere. And so we need to keep a close eye on her and keep her safe and just deal with her stomach pain and sort of manage her disorientation. And so in this moment, Sharon, the nurse, who's just found Mildred once again cleaning some room she was not supposed to be in, she just, followed their protocol and went in and kind of gently told Mildred, like, okay, put the broom down, come with me. And, Mildred listened and she led Mildred back to her room and Sharon continued going about her day. A couple of days later, and Sharon was doing her regular rounds through the hospital. And as she did, she went into Mildred's room and once again, she saw the room was empty. Now, Sharon was actually just kind of annoyed at this point. She wasn't really concerned because by this point, Mildred had done this, had, become disoriented and left to go clean or something so many times by this point that it was just kind of a hassle. But, Sharon just followed protocol and quickly left the room and began walking along the floor looking for Mildred so she could bring her back. But after searching the floor, she didn't find Mildred. And so after checking the whole floor again, but this time much more thoroughly, looking in every closet, every supply area, really searching the area and still not finding her, that's when Sharon began to panic. She began going to other nurses and doctors and asking them, have you seen Mildred? And remember, at this point, the whole floor is aware of what's going on with Mildred, but nobody had seen her, so nobody knew where she was. And so Sharon ultimately went and spoke to the higher-ups at the hospital and informed them what was going on here. And in turn, they launched this huge search all across the hospital, both inside and outside, to just go find Mildred and get her back. And while the search is ongoing, Sharon was walking around trying to be helpful because, she was somebody that worked closely with Mildred and had a sense of where she might go. And she was telling folks to go to messy areas because Mildred, when she would get confused, would basically go clean areas she deemed messy. And so go to parts of the hospital that might look messy. And so people were doing that. But this hospital, it was huge. It was 11 stories tall. And there were lots of areas that appeared messy. And so it just seemed like a kind of overwhelming task to quickly search this massive property for Mildred. And then on top of that, making it even harder to find Mildred was the fact that the hospital didn't have security cameras. So they couldn't just pull up the footage and see if maybe Mildred had walked outside or something. After about an hour of the search going on, when still they had not found Mildred and people were starting to wonder, like, are we even going to find her at all? It was at that point that something new and really concerning happened. Sharon called Mildred's cousin to let her and the rest of Mildred's family know that Mildred was missing and that this time it was actually pretty serious that they hadn't found her. But as Sharon is breaking this news to the cousin stops her and says, well, wait a minute, I think I know what's going on here. Because apparently a few hours earlier, the cousin had gone to the hospital to visit Mildred. And when they got there and spoke to the receptionist looked up Mildred to see what room she was in. And on their system, it showed that Mildred had checked out of the hospital that morning. So she was not there. And so, of course, this big search for Mildred was not going to find her because she wasn't at the hospital. But this really made no sense to Sharon. It did logically make sense that if she checked out, that would explain why she wasn't here. But Mildred should not have been allowed to check out of the hospital. She still definitely was not well. Not just her confusion, but also the stomach pain she was having. Like, she was still totally sick and should not have been discharged. But, the cousin was adamant that they actually left the hospital because they told them, Mildred's not here. There's no one to go visit. She's gone. She checked out. And so Sharon hung up with the cousin and quickly ran down the hall to go talk to the receptionist to see if it was actually true that Mildred had been discharged. And when the receptionist looked it up, sure enough, it was true. Mildred had checked out. And so at this point, Sharon, she could not believe what she was hearing. This didn't make sense. And so Sharon, kind of not knowing what to do next, she walked away from the receptionist and she just walked over to the window that looked out to the front of the hospital. And she was just standing there wondering what she should do. And as she was standing there, she was just looking outside kind of absentmindedly. And she saw all these cars whizzing by, all these busy streets out there. And she suddenly had this thought, like, well, wait a minute, what if Mildred, in her confused state, went to the front desk and somehow talked her way out and got discharged and has now wandered out into the streets. And what if she's gotten hit by a car or something? Like, this could be an emergency. Like, I have to do something. And so Sharon's first thought was, I got to call the police. And so not long after this, after Sharon did call the authorities, the police arrived at the hospital, and they arrived along with search dogs. And one of the search dogs almost immediately picked up Mildred's scent by one of the front doors of the hospital. And the dog led its handler down the street, which seemed to confirm that Mildred really had left the hospital. And so officers would search a full square mile around the hospital, and they even got a helicopter to begin flying overhead. And the search went on for days. But nobody found Mildred. There was no sign of her. She just disappeared. Until almost 2 weeks later. On Wednesday, July 28th, so 13 days after Mildred went missing, a security guard walked into a construction site on his daily patrol. And at the very edge of this site, he noticed there was a long, thin hole in the ground that was about 5 feet deep that had been dug to lay some pipework. But when the security guard just happened to walk over and look down into the hole, he gasped because he saw Mildred. It would turn out, on the day Mildred disappeared, she did become very confused, and she believed she was once again a housekeeper, and she went out, left her room to go do some work. And so Mildred just began wandering around the hospital for quite a while, and surprisingly, nobody stopped her, even though she had left the floor that she was supposed to be on. But she was just such a pleasant person and so nice that she just kind of passed by people and nobody said anything. And after wandering around for quite some time and going in and out of different places and up and down flights of stairs, she eventually found this construction site. And to her, it was not a construction site. Instead, it was this horribly messy area that needed to be cleaned because there was pieces of wood and plastic and debris everywhere. And so she just began to clean. And after a while, she had picked up quite a bit of debris and she had basically straightened the whole area out. But as she walked around towards the back of the site, she did not see a hole in the ground and she fell inside. And because Mildred was just very disoriented, she likely didn't understand that she had, fallen into a hole and needs to climb out again. And so in this dark space, this dark confined space, she would have just continued to feel more and more disoriented and maybe didn't even attempt to climb out. But however it happened, she just stayed in that hole and remained undetected for days until she just eventually died. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this case is that Mildred actually never left the hospital. That construction site was on the 10th floor of the hospital. Mildred had just kind of meandered her way up to that floor, and that floor was being renovated. That was the construction site. And she had fallen in that hole. Then you have all these people that are searching the hospital looking for her, and they searched that construction site, but they didn't look down into this little hole. And Mildred, assuming she was alive when they were up there, didn't have the wherewithal to call out for help. She was confused and just stayed quiet in that hole. And so she was never found. Today, it's still not known why Mildred was listed as having been discharged on the day she went missing, because she was not discharged. Some people say maybe it was added into the system by mistake, or perhaps it was just a glitch in the system, but however it happened, it was just an anomaly. And then also the police dog that found Mildred's scent that took the authorities away from the hospital, that's also anomalous. We don't know how or why that happened. Ultimately, Mildred's family would sue the hospital for $13 million in damages, but eventually they dropped the case.
Man.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. to Mildred. Yeah, that's sad, bro. And kudos to the nurse for not giving up, trying to look for her. But also, not saying nothing about like with the cousin saying that she came to try to see Mildred or whatever, and they said she checked out. I wonder, could you have called whoever was her
next of kin?
Yeah, does she have kids or siblings and stuff like that to see hey, did one of y'all come pick up, because obviously she's not driving herself knowing that she's in her confused state. So someone would have to have come pick her up. But I guess that's neither here nor there. I just hate that she was listed in the system as being checked out when the entire time she's in the hospital on the 10th floor for 2 weeks. Perishing,
bro. You gotta just imagine what she probably went through too. Like,
her last name Lancaster.
oh my bad. Just imagine what she probably went through. You know what I'm saying?
Facts. That's sad.
I was trying to see if they had any information.
Yeah.
Besides, like, I know it's this one, Los Angeles Times. They got an article, but ain't really much.
Yeah.
But I guess because also it's 1993, so
yeah, it happened.
You probably have to go to like a library. You have to go get the physical, go through the physical newspaper archives.
Yeah.
And find it that way. But R.I.P. man, that's a tragic way to go.
Tragic.
You think she was developing like dementia?
Possibly.
Because the stomach issue and also the confusion.
Well, with the confusion, yeah, possibly, yeah.
On the night of January 12th, 1964, a police sergeant named Neil Johnson entered a small apartment in Los Angeles County, California, along with a team of other officers. And basically, as soon as they walked inside this apartment, they were hit with this blast of hot air and also a just terrible smell. And very quickly, Sergeant Johnson and the others recognized where the smell was coming from, because on the couch was a man who was clearly dead and decomposing. So Sergeant Johnson and the rest of the police officers had been called here by this building's landlord. The landlord had gotten complaints from some other tenants about this awful smell coming from this specific apartment. So they'd come to check it out and, mystery solved. There was a dead person in here. And based on the information they'd already gotten from the landlord about who was renting this apartment, the police already suspected that they knew exactly who this man was. The tenant of this apartment, the sole tenant, was a 38-year-old man named Eugene Meadows. And he'd actually just moved into this apartment only 6 days ago. And on top of, living in this new apartment, Eugene also was just kind of new to the area. He'd moved here from about 8 hours away for a new job. So realistically, there was a good chance he didn't really know anybody in the area. Sergeant Johnson and a few other officers walked over to the couch to take a closer look at Eugene's body. And pretty much right away, they could tell two things. One, it was pretty clear Eugene had not died recently. He had died maybe at least a couple of days ago, so he'd been sitting here for some time. And the other thing they noticed was very clearly there was a bullet hole in the back of his head. But as Sergeant Johnson began looking around the apartment for more clues, he realized that the bullet hole really didn't make any sense. Because first of all, the whole apartment was very neat and very clean. There was no sign of a robbery or a struggle or a break-in. Plus, the landlord had told Sergeant Johnson that when he had first come to check on Eugene after the initial reports of a bad smell coming from his apartment, the landlord had found that the apartment door was locked from the inside. And also he found that all the windows were closed and locked as well, which meant if Eugene was murdered, the only way that was possible would be if the killer, after shooting Eugene, left and then locked the door behind them, which meant they would have had a key, which sort of suggested that, maybe they knew Eugene, or maybe they just took the key off of him, but, Eugene is new to the area, and so it just seems sort of like a difficult theory to come up with of who would have killed him and left the scene looking this way. But the alternative to murder, perhaps that Eugene took his own life, also didn't really seem possible. Because number one, they couldn't find a gun. There was no gun in the apartment. Certainly not a gun that was near Eugene. If he would have taken his own life, the gun should have been nearby, and it wasn't. And they searched the whole apartment. There was no gun. So Sergeant Johnson and the entire team were pretty much baffled at this point. It just didn't seem to make sense how this guy could have died. And so instead of trying to, piece it all together now, they just transferred Eugene's body to the local coroner for an autopsy, hoping that the autopsy would give them more answers and allow them to understand what happened here. However, when the coroner examined Eugene's body, things actually only got more strange, because the coroner could not find a bullet inside of Eugene's head or anywhere in his body. And there wasn't an exit wound. So imagine if you get shot, the bullet goes into you, unless there's an exit wound where that bullet can exit you, the bullet will remain inside your body. And so Eugene has one hole in his head, a hole in the back of his head, a bullet hole, no second hole, no exit wound, and no bullet inside of his body. And in addition to this one big anomaly that, there is no bullet, the coroner also noticed two other things that were strange. The first was that Eugene had something known as a calcium ridge on the back of his head near the area where there was this hole. And it's a genetic thing. Basically, there's a section of his skull that was harder, but also more brittle. This would have been something he was born with and likely basically didn't affect him in any way, but considering it was near the area where there's this hole in his head, the coroner flagged it. And then the other thing the coroner noticed is that when he looked at Eugene's internal organs, like in his abdomen, they were a very bright cherry red color. Now, at first glance, the coroner actually didn't necessarily think that the color of his organs really mattered that much. But as the coroner really just could not make sense of how Eugene actually died, he began to go back to the color of the organs, and he thought of something. And so he went to the police and he asked Sergeant Johnson to, just in case, go back to Eugene's apartment and check for this one very specific thing. If it's there, it explains this whole thing. And sure enough, Sergeant Johnson and the police, they went back to Eugene's apartment and they found the thing that the coroner suspected would be there. And it did explain the whole mystery. And it turned out what happened to Eugene was not even close to what Sergeant Johnson originally suspected. Eugene was not murdered. He was not shot in the head, nor did he take his own life. In fact, there was no shooting. He was not shot to death either by himself or by somebody else. Instead, what the coroner suspected from seeing those bright red organs is that maybe Eugene died from carbon monoxide poisoning, which can cause your organs to turn bright cherry red. And so when they went to his apartment, they discovered his heater was leaking and it was emitting poisonous carbon monoxide gas. And so the mystery of how Eugene died was solved. He died from carbon monoxide poisoning. But how he got this hole in his head is a whole other story. After Eugene passed out on his couch from this poisoning, the gas caused his brain to swell. And because he had that calcium ridge on the back of his head that he was born with, that's that harder but more brittle part of his skull, well, as his brain continued to swell, it eventually broke through that calcium ridge and basically his head exploded. His brain blew out the back of his head, giving the impression that he had been shot.
Wow.
Were you getting that at all?
No. And it's just so sad because he just moved there. 8 days before? Like, brand new.
And just imagine all those officers was in there too. And they were in taking it, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They had a whole gas leak.
Oh, that's sad.
Oh, Lord. I didn't know like that happened with the brain and all that. And just.
Well, it's because of his condition.
Yeah, but I'm saying I ain't never heard nothing like that before. That's insane, man.
Facts.
Wow, 38.
One afternoon in the spring of 1998, a 64-year-old man named Klaus Schmidt walked through the international terminal of the Dublin airport in Ireland. And for some reason, as he was walking, he just felt really, really nervous. Like the idea of getting on his plane today just felt like a really bad idea. When Klaus finally spotted his gate at the end of the terminal, that feeling of almost dread really just totally washed over him. Now, Klaus generally was kind of a nervous flyer, but he never had this sort of existential dread before boarding a flight. This was new. This felt different. And so finally, when he got to the end of his terminal and actually saw his gate and saw people boarding his flight, he almost had like a panic attack. And he thought, maybe I should just listen to my gut feeling here and not board this plane and just, fly out tomorrow or something. But as he's standing there looking at the people getting on this flight, his logical side of his brain began taking over, and he just told himself that he was just being really nervous here, that there was nothing to be worried about, that he should just get on the flight, that it'll be over soon, and he was just overreacting. And so even though he really could not fully get rid of this feeling he had, this dread that was like in his stomach at this point, he kind of overrode how he was feeling, walked up to the gate, scanned his ticket, and boarded the flight. About an hour later, and Klaus, he's in the aircraft, they've taken off by this point, and they're flying over the Irish Sea, and Klaus, he was by the window, he raised up the blind on his window, and he looked out, and it was, smooth sailing out there, the water's beautiful and calm down below, and he looked around at the other passengers and saw people were, relaxed. They were reading and relaxing and chatting, like there was no reason to think anything was going wrong on this flight. But still, Klaus just could not get rid of this feeling, and he just desperately wanted the plane to land and be done with this thing. But Klaus knew he couldn't speed the plane up, and so instead he just kind of did some breathing exercises and tried to calm himself down, and at first it was working. But over the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, Klaus started to feel like he was having a hard time breathing. And he began looking around to see if other passengers were also struggling to breathe. Like maybe there's something wrong with the cabin pressure. Maybe there's something wrong with the air inside of the plane. But, he'd look around and everybody still seems completely fine. It's just Klaus, who by this point is, he's sweating, he's rocking back and forth, he's so anxious. He just desperately wants this flight to be over. But again, it was like this inability to breathe continued to get worse and worse. And then he started to feel this really intense tightness in his chest. And he was telling himself, like, I'm having a panic attack. That's what's happening here. It's like my anxiety is fully taken over. I can't control it. And so he took off his jacket and he kind of unbuttoned his shirt and he's like dripping sweat. And the other passengers now are starting to take notice of Klaus. Like something's going on with this guy, but no one said anything yet. And Klaus, he's trying to stay calm, but he keeps looking around and everybody else seems fine and something's going on with him. And then that tightness in his chest, it got so bad that Klaus realized that this likely was not anxiety. He could be having a heart attack. And then as soon as he realized that that likely was what was happening to him, it was like all of his symptoms got 10 times worse. And before long, he felt himself kind of fading out of consciousness. He heard other passengers near him yelling out for help, clearly about him. And then a flight attendant ran over and began yelling out to the rest of the plane, "Are there any doctors on board?" And so as Klaus is drifting further and further into unconsciousness, all he could think to himself was his intuition was right. Something bad was going to happen on this plane. But before he could think much more about it, his vision went blurry and he faded into darkness. But it would turn out that Klaus's intuition was actually only half right. Because while it was true that something terrible did happen to him on that flight, he really did have a heart attack, it actually was his decision to get on the flight that saved his life. Because this particular flight was carrying 40 heart specialists home from an international cardiology conference, and they had samples with them of a brand new heart drug that was not yet available to the public.
What?
So when Klaus had his heart attack and the flight attendant began calling out for a doctor, well, the 40 doctors all shot their hands up in the air, and one of them rushed over and literally just gave Klaus this new medication that saved his life.
What? Wow.
You talking about
That's
blessing in disguise, bro?
just imagine if you. Oh my gosh. Hey.
Just imagine he caught a different flight, later flight.
A later flight awaited, or
Just perfect timing.
wow.
That's scary though.
That is scary. So it's a story to tell, but it is definitely
What you
scary.
said, that's the story you tell. Like you tell your grandparents, your grandkids, your great grandkids, your kids, and that's the story just meant to live on forever throughout the family. You know,
Yep.
I was saved by because I was on a plane with 40 different.
And I almost didn't get on. I did. I almost. I'll be telling everybody.
I almost didn't make it, but lucky I had got on that plane.
Get on everybody. But yeah, that is crazy though.
Y'all spam us up, man. Let us know y'all thoughts down below for us.
Please
but
do.
Until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
We are.
Kid and
We are.
CMGT.
Ain't no time to kick it, got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar.